During the 1920s, the 18th Amendment made it official that alcohol can no longer be made, sold, or transported in the U.S. This was put in place to lower crime. Unfortunately, organized crime grew, courts and prisons became overpacked, and corruption of authorities were prevalent. The Valentine's Day Massacre on February 14, 1929, members of Al Capone's gang executed rival bootleggers in a Chicago garage. Al Capone was a notorious gangster known for operating in bootlegging, prostitution, and gambling that dominated organized crime. The massacre was a good representation of violence in the 1920s. In Chicago, prohibition was difficult to enforce and quickly failed. In 1933, Congress created a resolution of the 21st Amendment in the Constitution, which repealed the 18th Amendment. Utah became the 36th state to ratify the amendment to reach the necessary amount to repeal. By 1966, all of the states had abandoned prohibition completely. During the 1920s, the standard of living increased, which resulted in people moving to urban areas. Many things led to prosperity during this time period, like more opportunities for women in the workforce, more attention on the marketing of consumer goods, and stock market growing. Throughout the decade, many new products were being sold to the middle class to make their lives easier with household products and appliances that were inexpensive, and which led to a massive growth in consumerism. Advertising played an important role in selling more goods. Not only was there an increase in the market for kitchen appliances, but also automobiles. Henry Ford produced the average American car, which was easy to own at a low price, and because of this, the mass production of cars made it possible for over 1 million of them to be sold by the 1920s. Buy now, pay later became the motto of many Americans of the roaring 20s. Over half of the nation's automobiles were sold on credit, and this made it easier for Americans to have debt.
Entertainment played a large part in the lifestyle of people in the 1920s. This included radio broadcasts, music, literature, movies, sports, and much more. By 1923, nearly 3 million people owned radios. There were 600 radio stations along with it. They played different things such as sporting events, newscasts, and political commentary. Jazz music became increasingly popular. It is a combination of ragtime, marching band music, and blues. Louis Armstrong is considered one of the most influential artists in jazz. There was a drastic change in the style of literature as well. A famous American author was F. Scott Fitzgerald. He wrote the most important American novel of the age, The Great Gatsby, a tale of lost love and betrayal. Movies also became very popular in the 1920s. Charlie Chaplin was a famous movie star at the time. These movies excited people who had just experienced the dark times of the war. These movies started off silent with live musical support. Soon, there was also music added. Babe Ruth was one of the most influential baseball players of the time. With the phrase, "The Curse of Bambino" did not come into being for more than half a century. Between 1920 and 1964, the Yankees won 29 American League games.
The 1920s was a decade in which women and religion were reborn and African Americans became more free and independent. Religion was broken up into two, fundamentalists and modernists, those who wanted to combine science with religion and those who wished to keep the tradition alive. Religion was a continuous debate that was eventually fought over in the Scopes trial, where a substitute teacher taught evolution to high school students. Also at that time, the KKK raised once again and expanded to about 5 million people, and their new targets included blacks, Jews, and urbanties. They were also anti-communists, Semitists, and Catholics. The film, The Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith, is an important American film because it portrays the KKK to be seen as heroes. Eventually, what almost became the star of violence quickly made the Klan disappear due to criminal charges they were possibly facing. Not only that, but with the help of the NAACP, they were able to disband it. Speaking of which, many factors helped African Americans throughout the 20s. The Great Migration also played a big factor, allowing them to face less racial segregation and seek job opportunities. The Jim Crow laws were the laws that enforced racial segregation. During that time, women were becoming more active in society. Flappers were the new things where women wore short skirts and flaunted their disdain for what was an acceptable behavior. At this time, married women did not get jobs, while immigrants typically worked outside of the house. However, there was a rise of employment for single women.
The 1920s was a time of reform for women. Women had attained a greater role in society and in politics as well. However, the mindset of people did not completely change, and the prejudice against women continued. In our group, we have developed 3 criteria to approximate the extent of reform involving women within the 1920s. Were there any political changes regarding women? Yes, there were political changes such as the enactment of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. However, although they were given the right to vote, they still did not receive the same opportunities as men regarding work. Did society view women differently? To an extent, women were viewed differently because they were allowed more political responsibility, but many still had their traditional views that women should only be responsible for household duties. Were women treated equally as men? No. Women were not paid as much as men and were seen as not mentally equal to men regarding politics.